Stray dog follows. A man for miles. What happens? Next is heartbreaking. Near the edge of the Karoo, late afternoon, a man walked the old gravel road with a small pack over one shoulder. The sun was still high, pressing down in heavy layers, and the wind moved in short, sharp gusts. Dust clung to his boots. The road was empty in all directions. But after the second mile, something changed. Behind him, where wind carved thin spirals in the dirt, a shape emerged. Low, pale, thin. A dog. Walking with no sound, no signal, no bark. She moved in his tracks, her ribs casting long shadows across her flank, one paw curling oddly each time she stepped. Still, she followed. The man didn't turn. He didn't speak. He simply adjusted the strap on his shoulder and kept walking. But a rhythm had begun, quiet and certain. 30 paces behind, she moved in time. The land was open but watching. The kind of open where silence feels shaped. Not empty, where the presence of a second life changes how the ground sounds beneath each footfall. The dog did not whimper, nor did she fall behind. Her body was thin to the edge of collapse, but her eyes stayed on the man's back as if she had already chosen something permanent. He paused once near a sloped patch of gravel, shifting his foot to remove a stone. She paused, too, just beyond the dust, then sat without lowering her eyes. Her ears were ragged. A scar stretched from the corner of her jaw down into the folds of her chest. There were no signs of a collar, no scent of human touch. Yet she did not flinch when the wind moved his coat. She only blinked once, then stood again as he resumed walking. There was nothing soft in her movement, nothing weak, just an exhausted, worn persistence. The man noticed. Not all at once, but gradually, the way you register the same bird call repeating every half-mile. By the time he reached the crooked fence that marked the turn toward the service road, he stopped and slowly looked back. The dog didn't move. Her tongue was low in her mouth, and her body shook faintly, but she did not look away. There was no expectation in her stance, just an uneasy balance between collapse and will. He crouched, rested his elbow on one knee, and looked at her for a long time. Then, very softly, he said, "You don't need to." He meant it as a kindness, a release. But the dog took a step forward, then another. If she followed, she would need strength she no longer had. If she stopped, she would lose the one thing that had not turned its back on her in days, maybe weeks. The man stood, walked again, and the dog, without sound, followed him. The road curled into long, empty hills. Each step stirred loose gravel and dust that clung to their feet. There were no houses, no towns. The sun was beginning to stretch shadows long across the flats. But still, two shapes kept moving forward, one out of habit, the other out of something quieter, harder to name. By dusk, they had traveled nearly 5 miles. The wind dropped. The man reached a rusted shelter used by transport workers and sat with his back to the wall. The dog remained standing, just outside the reach of shade. She watched. He poured a small measure of water from his canteen into a dented tin and placed it between them. Then he turned away and closed his eyes. After a long moment, she approached, slow, deliberate, favoring the paw with the old brake. She drank without sound, then lay down against the wall, a yard from his boots. Nothing passed between them, but the distance had changed. And as the night wind returned, curling softly through the broken fence nearby, 2 lives rested in silence, neither looking for rescue, only a place to stop walking. By morning, the wind had shifted. It no longer rolled across the land in quick bursts, but moved low and slow, like something tired of trying. The man stood beneath the lean-to's rusted roof, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The dust on his coat had hardened into fine ridges. When he stepped out onto the gravel, the dog rose from the earth without sound. She had not curled up during the night, only rested in the same half-standing position, as if uncertain she was welcome to fully sleep. Her legs shook when she stood, but she did not whimper. They walked. The road stretched flat and pale under the early light. His boots moved in even, practiced steps. Behind him, the dog followed, limping lightly on the rear paw but never stopping. Her gait was not smooth. Her body sagged slightly to one side with each step, but she held a steady rhythm. Every few hundred feet she slowed, then caught up again, her eyes never drifting from the space just behind his heels. There were no other travelers. No fences. The world around them was quiet in the way abandoned spaces often are, not dead, just waiting. Pale grasses lined the edges of the road, stiff and dry. Occasionally the man would glance toward the brush as if listening for something. But the only sound was wind against thorn branches and the faint shuffle of the dog's paws. He did not speak, not even when her steps faltered slightly near a patch of scattered glass and she paused to examine it before passing. Still no bark, no whine. Just that quiet, limping rhythm. By the 5th mile the sun had risen higher and heat shimmered faintly along the road's edges. The man reached a place where a concrete water trough once stood beside a broken post. It was dry now, but a small pipe still jutted from the side, and water seeped in thin, steady drips into a shallow pool below. He crouched and rinsed his hands first, then filled the dented tin once more from his pack. He set it down without looking behind him. The dog stood a few yards off, still watching. She did not rush. Her ribs rose and fell with each breath, and her head dipped lower with the weight of the sun, but she did not move until he stepped back. Then, slowly, she approached. Her paws were cracked, lined with dust. Her eyes, one slightly clouded, the other sharp, stayed low, focused only on the water. She drank for longer this time, then backed away and sat, spine crooked but balanced, not quite relaxed, but no longer braced to flee. The man sat on a flat stone nearby. He looked at her for the first time that morning. Not curiosity, not invitation, just the quiet acknowledgement of something that refuses to leave. "If you're coming," he said softly, "you'll need to make it to town." The dog blinked. Her ears twitched once at the sound of his voice, but she made no move to rise. The wind picked up again, brushing along the fence line where dry wire trembled in a broken rhythm. They sat like that for some time. Neither pushing forward, neither turning away. Just two worn bodies in the middle of the road, held still by heat and dust. Eventually, the man stood. He adjusted his coat, shifted the strap on his pack, and took a long look at the horizon. Then he began walking again. The road curved slightly, rising just enough to catch the early shimmer of metal from the distant railway line. After a few beats, the dog stood, shook the dust from her coat, and limped after him. No sound, no signal. Just a quiet shadow in the heat, determined not to be left behind. By late afternoon, the road sloped toward a bend marked by 3 leaning fence posts and a rusted sign that had lost its letters to the sun. A small shed stood nearby, weather-worn and silent, its door hanging from one hinge. The man reached it without breaking stride and paused in its shadow. The heat had thickened again. In the distance, mirage lines blurred the edge of the earth. Behind him, the dog came into view. Moving slower now. The limp in her right hind leg had grown more pronounced, each step slightly dragging. Her breath was shallow, her ribs sharp beneath a coat gone dull with dust. Still, she did not whine. She approached the shed and stood just outside the shade, panting, her body swaying slightly from the effort of standing still. The man reached into the side pocket of his pack and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside was a thin piece of bread, dry and cracked around the edges. He knelt and placed it gently on the ground between them, not reaching forward, not calling her closer. He simply rested back on his heels and waited. The dog didn't move. Her eyes darted between his hands and the bread, her ears flicking at the edges like torn paper in wind. Flies hovered near her shoulders, and a small scab pulsed above one front paw. Still, she remained motionless. Her body was not that of a stray confused by separation. She carried too many old wounds, too much caution. The way she held herself, not wild but watchful, suggested she had once belonged somewhere, and had learned over time how quickly belonging could turn. The man didn't speak. He kept his hands visible, resting on his knees. The shed behind him creaked once in the settling air, but he did not flinch. Time passed slowly in the heat. Eventually, the dog lowered her head. Not fast, not in hunger. It was a slow movement of weight, of quiet decision. She stepped forward, sniffed once at the bread, then took it between her teeth and retreated. Not far, just enough to feel space again. Then she lay down, paws folded beneath her, and ate in slow, careful bites. He watched her ribs shift with each breath. One ear was split down the middle. The edge healed into a soft curl. Her tail never wagged, but her body had stopped shaking. "She's not lost," he murmured, more to the wind than to her. "She knows exactly where she is." She finished the last bite and licked the dust near her paws. Then, without lifting her head, she looked at him. Not in fear, not in hope, just in recognition of a presence that hadn't turned away. A fly buzzed between them. The man stood, stretched his legs, and took a sip from his canteen. He looked toward the road again, now glowing faintly in the lowering sun. It was still another half-day to the edge of the next settlement, if there even was one. If the dog kept moving, she'd have to survive the night walk. If she stayed, she'd lose the only thing she'd chosen to trust in days. He walked slowly from the shed, keeping to the side of the road where the gravel gave way to softer earth. His pace was deliberate but not rushed. He didn't look back. But after a pause, the dog rose. She shook once, her body folding in slightly from the pain in her leg, then followed. No sound, no bark. Just the soft crunch of worn paws behind him as they both moved into the lowering light. They reached the edge of a closed depot just after dusk. The road had narrowed, bending past old telephone poles leaning into the wind. Beyond a broken gate, crates were stacked in uneven rows beside a weather-faded structure. The man stepped inside the open wall, laid his coat down on the concrete, and sat without a word. The light had drained from the sky. The wind no longer moved. He had not seen the dog for the last mile. She had fallen behind at some point near a dry wash where the road dipped and turned. He hadn't called out. Something in him understood she would either come or she wouldn't. He ate a small piece of fruit, then lay back with one arm across his eyes. The floor beneath him was warm from the day's heat. The silence stretched, soft and weightless. A beetle tapped against the wall once, then disappeared. Somewhere in the dark, near the edge of the crate stacks, there was breathing. Not close, not touching, but steady. He did not rise to check. The sound was enough. It came in uneven rhythms, like a bellows folded too far, lungs catching and releasing with the dry patience of something used to waiting. He listened without turning his head. That night, he did not dream, just shifted once in sleep and settled again into the warmth of the concrete. By morning, a thin mist clung to the ground. The crates cast long gray shadows across the lot. The man rose slowly, brushing dust from his sleeves. He stretched once, then stepped outside. The dog was there, not at the door, not under the crates, but 20 feet off, lying in the grass where the wind came through the trees. Her body was curled tightly, tail near her chin, but her eyes were open. She did not lift her head when he moved. She only blinked. The earth around her was marked by faint impressions where she had shifted through the night. One paw dragged slightly in the dirt, and her chest rose slow and shallow. Yet there was a calmness in the way she lay. Not relaxed, but present. The man stood for a moment, then reached for the tin cup, poured the last of his morning water into it, and placed it on a flat stone between them. He did not wait for her to come. He simply adjusted his pack and walked past the line of trees. Back toward the road. It was not a signal, not a command, just movement, a beginning again. The dog watched. Then, after several long breaths, she unfolded herself from the grass, tested her paw with caution, and began to follow. No bark, no sound. Only the quiet rhythm of two shadows moving once more through the morning light. Neither ahead, neither behind. Just walking, one breath at a time, toward whatever waited beyond the next turn in the road. By the end of the third day, the terrain had softened. The flat, scorched road gave way to dirt paths that curved through low fields, where pale shrubs bent under their own weight. The man's pace had slowed, not from fatigue, but from something quieter, the kind of slowing that comes when a destination finally begins to take shape. The dust on his boots was layered and cracked, and the line of salt on his collar showed how long it had been since he'd stood in shade that lasted more than a moment. The dog was still behind him, always behind, never beside, never ahead. Her limp had worsened, though she hid it well. The wound on her hind leg had reopened the day before, just a faint dark smear along her thigh, but she hadn't stopped. Not once. She walked with her head lowered, as if pulling from something far deeper than strength. It was near sunset when the first signs of the town emerged. The bend in the road where fencing became straighter and the telephone poles stood fully upright. A rusted tin sign read Wesseltown, Pop. 138, barely visible through the peeling paint. One child's bicycle lay abandoned near a gate, its tires flat. The man paused at the edge of the road. A narrow path split off toward a squat building painted in soft green. The word Clinic stenciled across the side in weatherproof white. Outside, under the awning, stood a woman in a navy vest, holding a clipboard. She was older, gray hair pulled back beneath a cap, and she squinted into the distance as the man approached. The dog had stopped 20 feet behind, hidden partially by a rise in the road. Her body was still. The man reached the woman and said something quiet. He pointed once, not toward the town, not toward himself, but toward the road behind him. The vet looked, shielding her eyes from the low sun. The dog remained motionless. Her legs were locked in place, her body tense but not retreating. The vet asked something, her voice low, her posture careful. The man shook his head, not in refusal, but in uncertainty. Then he knelt. He didn't call out. He didn't offer food. He just placed both palms on the ground in front of him and waited. His body folded in on itself, small, non-threatening. The wind passed between them. The dog looked at the woman, then at the man. Her ears lifted once, unsure. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. Not toward the man. Not directly, but around him. Her steps were angled, deliberate, as if she were circling something invisible between them. Her shoulder brushed the edge of his coat and she flinched. He didn't move. Her nose lifted toward the open door of the clinic. The smell of iodine, wood polish, and faint animal fur hung in the air. The light inside was dim but warm. She paused. Then she walked in. The vet followed, steps quiet, hands empty. The man remained kneeling until they were both inside. Only then did he rise, slowly, carefully. If she had turned back, he would have stayed. If she had run, he would not have followed. But she had entered, not for him, not because of him, but because something in the space ahead had felt less dangerous than the world behind. As the door eased shut behind them, the man stood outside in the fading light. He did not go in. He placed his pack beside the stairs, sat on the edge of the porch, and rested his hands in his lap. He waited. The wind curled gently through the trees beyond the fence. A single bird called once, then fell silent, and inside, for the first time in days, the dog did not have to walk any farther. The clinic was small and smelled faintly of eucalyptus and steel. Cabinets lined one wall, a low table stood in the center, and a single lamp cast soft light across the floor. The vet closed the door quietly behind them. The dog stood near the threshold, shoulders hunched, her legs stiff as if bracing for command. No leash was offered, no hands reached for her. The woman knelt several feet away, not speaking, just observing. After a long pause, she opened a drawer, took out a clean towel and laid it gently across the table surface. She stepped back. The dog did not move. The man entered last, standing near the far wall with his arms folded across his chest. He did not speak either. His gaze stayed low. It took time, but eventually the dog moved forward. Not toward the table, but toward the vet's boots, where she paused, sniffed once, then sat heavily on her right side. Her paw curled under. Her eyes stayed open. The vet crouched beside her, moving slowly, hands always visible. She began with the front legs, fingers brushing through the stiff fur. The pads were torn, one cracked open across the center. The vet pressed gently and felt the dog flinch, but there was no growl. Only stillness. Her side was thin to the bone, the ribs shifting with each shallow breath. When the vet moved to the rear flank, she found an old puncture wound that had half healed over, ringed with dried blood. Then, lower down, just above the abdomen, her fingers stopped. A slight swelling. Not new. Hard, unmoving. She pressed again. The dog did not resist. Her chest rose, held, then fell. "It's an old mass," the vet said softly, glancing up once. "Likely painful. Could be more." The man didn't answer. His arms stayed folded. His face held no reaction. But when the vet met his eyes, he looked away. She continued the exam. Both ears were torn, one with a clean slice, the other folded from scarring. A nick above her left eye. The tip of her tail had gone hairless, marked by rough skin. Signs of fights or avoidance of them. Years of life that had demanded movement before rest. And through it all, the dog did not move. Not once. The vet finished and sat back on her heels. The towel beneath the dog was speckled now with dust, blood, and the faint pink of old infection. "I don't think she's in danger of dying tonight," the vet said. "But she's in pain. Every step costs her something." The man finally spoke, almost inaudibly. "She hasn't made a sound." "No," the vet replied, folding the towel. "She wouldn't." They stood together in silence. The dog stayed on the floor, head low, eyes half closed. She wasn't asleep, but her body had softened, as if some thread that had been pulled tight for weeks had finally begun to ease. The vet reached for a small bowl and filled it with water, then placed it just beside the dog's front paw. The dog looked at it, then back toward the door. She did not drink. The man stepped forward, crouched nearby. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You're safe here." The dog didn't turn her head, but her ear twitched once, faint and tired. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the clinic siding. Inside, no one moved. Not yet. They had made it this far. And now, for the first time, she did not have to run. The next morning arrived without fanfare. Pale light crept through the high windows, soft and steady. The vet stood quietly in the back room, her clipboard resting on the counter, the ink smudged from how many times she had rewritten the same sentence. The scans were conclusive. The mass in the dog's abdomen had spread. Deep tissue, likely internal bleeding. It explained the stiff gait, the shallow breath, the quiet refusal to eat even when food was near. This was not healing. It was holding on, and even that wouldn't last long. In the main room, the dog lay on a folded blanket beside the table, her head resting just inches from the wall. Her chest rose in a slow rhythm, each breath catching faintly near the top. She had not stood since the exam. When the man had returned that morning, his face marked with road dust, his coat damp with dew, she had opened one eye and watched him cross the floor. Nothing more. He now sat beside her, not touching, but close. One hand rested palm down on the floor, just near her front paw. His boots were off. His pack leaned against the wall. He had not said a word. Not to the vet. Not to the dog. She shifted slightly, her paw brushing the edge of his fingers. He didn't move. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft click of the vet preparing the injection, hidden behind the small dividing curtain. She gave them time, not as a courtesy, but as something closer to a promise. The man's fingers inched forward until they barely touched her fur. She didn't flinch. Instead, with a slow, quiet motion, she leaned her head. Not fully, just enough to press the weight of her jaw into the side of his hand. Not trust, not surrender, just presence. The vet stepped softly back into the room. She knelt on the opposite side, near the dog's shoulder, and waited. There was no rush. The man nodded once, eyes fixed on the space just beyond the dog's ear. She did not seem afraid. Her body remained still, her breath steady. There were no whimpers, no sounds. The needle entered just beneath the skin. The vet moved slowly, carefully. The dog's eyes blinked once, then closed. The man whispered, "I'm here." Her breathing began to slow. Each rise of her chest grew shallower, each pause longer. Her paw pressed gently against the floor. Her body, once always braced to run, now began to rest. In the last few seconds, her weight shifted slightly toward the man's hand, as if the instinct to move had finally given way to stillness. Then her chest rose one final time, and stopped. The room held its silence. The vet stood slowly and stepped back, her eyes lowered. No ceremony, no words, just space. The man remained on the floor beside her, his hand still resting near where her paw had been. The warmth of her body had not yet faded. The quiet in the room was complete, but not empty. Outside, the first birds began their morning calls. The air had cooled slightly, and the sky took on a soft pink hue. Inside the clinic, nothing moved, but something had been released, not forgotten, not lost, just no longer hurting. And for the first time since she had chosen to follow him, she was still. The morning air was lighter than it had been in days. Pale mist hugged the low fences outside the clinic, lifting slowly as the sun began to rise over the edge of the valley. The man stepped out alone. His coat was buttoned, the pack on his shoulder lighter now. He paused for a moment at the top of the steps, one hand resting on the rail. His eyes traced the yard in front of him, where the dry grass bent low from wind and where something else lingered beneath the quiet. A trail of faint paw prints still marked the clinic yard, pressed shallow into the soft earth. Just a few. 4 steps from the porch, a hesitation, then another set leading toward the fence. Then nothing, as if she had simply stopped and watched the wind move. The man stepped off the porch. He didn't follow the prints. He turned down the main road where the gravel gave way to packed dirt, and the morning light stretched in long bands across the hills. He walked slower now, not with burden, but with the unfamiliar rhythm of having no one behind him. In the past days, her quiet presence had shaped his pace, his breath, his awareness of each sound behind him, the soft scratch of her limp, the subtle pause whenever he stopped to drink, the way she always kept just enough distance to not be a burden, but never enough to be forgotten. Now there was only silence. At the first bend in the road, where the brush grew thicker and the wind curved through the low trees, he stopped. The habit was too deep. He didn't look back, not fully, but his step slowed, one hand brushing the edge of his coat. She wasn't there. The space behind him held only morning stillness and a rising sun, but he stood for a long moment anyway. Eyes resting on the trail ahead, not out of hope, not out of grief, just a quiet honoring of the pattern that had carried them through so many miles. He shifted his weight and kept walking, not quickly, not with purpose, just steady, with pauses where he used to wait. And though she would never walk behind him again, Some part of her remained in every step he took, in the silence between footfalls, in the stillness of the road ahead, in the memory of breath beside him when no words were spoken. The valley opened wide as he passed the final fence post, and a soft breeze lifted the dust behind him in gentle spirals. Somewhere beyond the hills, birds stirred the trees. A dog was not following any more, but the man still walked slower, just in case.